There are many skills you need to develop as a game designer in order to be successful. But in my opinion, there is one skill that underpins it all and is an absolute necessity in order to get your game published. It's essential for going from a good game to a great game, and to be able to sign your game with a publisher and end up as a product on a shelf. But what is this skill? Hi, I'm Matthew Dunstan. I'm a full-time board game designer based in Australia, and to date I've released around 60 games published all around the world in various languages. On this channel I like to talk about all things game design, what it's like being a full-time game designer in the industry, and various tips and tricks that you can use to become a better game designer yourself. So what is this mysterious skill that I'm talking about? That skill is collaboration. To me, being a skilled collaborator is essential to so many different aspects of the game design process and working in the industry as a designer. Even if you're a designer working on your own game, sooner or later you're going to have to collaborate with other people in order to make your game better and to get it published. Collaboration can happen at many different stages of the game design process, no matter whether you're designing a game yourself or co-designing with another designer. In this video I want to look at those different stages where collaboration will come into your project and some ways why it might be so important. Hopefully at the end of this video you can see that collaboration is inevitable if you're going to make a game and get it published, and as such it's a skill that you need to cultivate if you're going to make it as a designer. And there are roughly 3 main groups or people that you might be expected to collaborate with in your design. The first is collaborating with another designer, and often this is through co-designing a game with one or more people. For me, designing with one other person is the most effective and fun way to design games. You always have someone to bounce ideas off, which is really great at the early stage to get excited about a game. And also, as you're working on a game, whenever you have a problem, firstly you have someone else to tell about that problem, but then you have 2 minds trying to solve that problem, rather than just one. Furthermore, game design can be quite a lonely process. Often you're sitting in front of your computer at home alone, believe me, I know. And so, for me, collaboration in the design stage is a great way to add a social aspect to the whole process. For me, the most fun that I have often is meeting with other designers that we're working on a game together, and that provides kind of an excuse to hang out with people I like to spend time with. If you design with someone who has a complementary set of skills that you have, then you bring together different skill sets to make you more effective as a team, to be able to complete a game design, to make it even better, and to improve your chances of getting it signed by a publisher. For instance, I've made a lot of games with Brett J. Gilbert, another designer that I met when I lived in Cambridge in the UK, and our skills are really complementary to each other. Not that I knew it when we started out, of course. I'm a kind of designer who's really good at coming up with new ideas, and then taking those new ideas and making them into a first prototype. Some designers find it really hard staring at a blank piece of paper and thinking about, well, how do I actually get this game from my head onto that piece of paper? But I'm actually quite good at it, if I say so myself. And while I'm really good at getting a design started, Brett has an excellent editorial kind of mind. So he's really good at responding and seeing a first prototype, and then immediately asking some really good questions about, should this really work like this? Or what if we did this with this part of the game? And so he really helps move it along from that initial design stage to the kind of iteration and playtest stage. Speaking of editing, he's also an excellent rules writer, which I admit I'm not particularly good at. And so that combination of someone coming up with a lot of ideas and making a first prototype, and then another designer kind of stepping in and editing those ideas and polishing them and cutting off the parts you don't need, ends up producing really great games. And I think that's why we've designed so many great games together. Also, as a side note, pitching as a duo of designers is much easier, at least in my opinion. When we would take many meetings at Essen together, over time we would get into a pattern of being able to pitch a game together. Often Brett would be talking and I would be setting up the prototype and moving the pieces around on the table. And we just had a real patter together that we got used to. And this patter was really efficient. We could describe a game really quickly, have it set up, and at different points each of us got to take a bit of a break during that pitch. It can be really exhausting when you're pitching back to back over a whole course of a day and over the course of a whole fair of 4 days. And doing it as duo was also a big advantage in that. Collaborating with other game designers can also be a great way to get into designing games that you're not normally used to designing or that are new to you. When I'm thinking about designing a new style of game, such as a children's game or a digital game, often I'll first think about which designer can I work with to learn about this genre that they have a lot of experience in. One example would be when I started to get into designing children's games. I did this with Théo Rivère, a great French designer who's designed many popular children's games, and we made games like Around the World together, and I leaned a lot on Theo's experience of understanding What do you need to have in a children's game, and what kind of complexity is okay? Another example would be me collaborating with Arnold Rowers of Tiny Touch Tales, where we made a digital game together. I'm a huge fan of Arnold's designs like Card Crawl and Card Thief. If you haven't seen them, check them out. They're really amazing designs, and in my opinion, the most tabletop adjacent digital games that you can learn a lot from as a game designer. And I had a great idea for a digital style game, and he was the perfect person that I thought to work with on that game. And thankfully he agreed to work with a complete stranger who contacted him over the internet. But just like complementary skill sets, collaboration can let you access different experiences about game design in different genres. The second main group of people that you'll be expected to collaborate with as a game designer are with players, and in the initial stages, players as playtesters of your game. While you might not think about it as collaboration per se, actually, playtesters do inevitably inject some of their own ideas and personality into a final game, and in the best instance, that can make your game so much better. If you're completely shut off from any form of collaboration with your playtesters, then you're going to miss out on some potentially really useful insights and improvements that you can make to your game. Of course, the skill of a designer is being able to sift through the different ideas and responses and emotions that playtesters will feed back to you during the playtesting process. But there are some gems in there that can be found, again, if you're open to that kind of collaboration. This is especially true, again, if you're designing in a type of genre that you don't normally enjoy playing yourself, or that's new to you as a designer. For example, playtesting with children is essential for making children's games because you can't quite understand what will be entertaining for the target audience. This kind of collaboration is really important in understanding what's clear in your game. Can players decipher how it works from the rules or from the components? How can you improve those things to make it clearer for players and a more intuitive process? And speaking of collaboration with players, in the end, once your game is published, in some ways you don't actually own it in the same way that you did maybe before. Once it's released out in the world, players own it almost as much as you do. You as the designer don't ship with the box. Players will create a game themselves when playing it together that might be a bit different from the experience that you had thought of designing initially. And in some ways, even though you aren't there, you're collaborating to create this game experience, you and the players, your initial ideas and their way of personifying it in the real world. Something like this is potentially more important in role-playing games, but it's just something to think about when you're designing and might help you once your game is released in understanding ultimately that you're not the sole owner of your game. In some ways you have to share that with the people who are going to play it. And lastly, but perhaps most importantly, is the idea of having to be able to collaborate with publishers. So even if you haven't collaborated with another designer on your game and you're the only one who's been working on it, at some point, if you want to sign that game with a publisher, you're going to have to get used to the idea of collaborating with them in order to bring your shared vision to the market. In a previous video, I talked about that you want to be the kind of person that a publisher wants to work with, and that will go into their decision to sign your game. And in the same way, you have to think about if a publisher is going to be good to work with. I would say this is far more important than trying to sign with the biggest publisher who has the biggest print runs and spend the most money on illustrations and components. It's much better to have a strong working relationship, a good collaborative relationship with a publisher than those other things. You can talk to other designers who have worked with that company before and get some feedback about what the experience was like beforehand when you're in the contract process, or even when you're considering which publishers that you might pitch your game to. And the key thing about collaboration with publishers is you need to be open to compromise about your game. You need to understand that once you sign a game to a publisher, they're ultimately the ones who are going to be taking the financial risk to make the game, and therefore they do get final say. In the best instance, both of you will work on the game together and you'll listen to each other's ideas and feedback to make a game that both of you are proud of in the end. But you're never going to get there if you hold on too tightly to your design, if you're too protective and too resistant to change. By the way, this is also true at pretty much every stage of the game designing process, especially playtesting. Publishers will know their target market better than you, and they'll want to shape your game into the type of experience that will fit that target market. And that might be slightly different to the audience you were imagining when you were first making the game. When you sign the game to a publisher, you're agreeing to that shift in direction, to that shift in focus. And this is why it's important to do your research before you sign your game, whether this is a publisher that you want to work with and whether your vision aligns with theirs. Much like when you're going to sit down and design a game with another designer, you start that by sitting down and talking about your visions for the game and whether those align. Similarly, when you're thinking about signing your game with a publisher, you should ask them questions and hopefully get into a discussion about how you both see the game ending up as a product and to see whether those visions align with each other. It's really important to have this discussion before you sign the game, because it can lead to difficulties and bad feelings if you get further along in the process and then realize that you aren't aligned. Collaboration is a lot about give and take and compromise, and this is a skill that you need to develop and be used to using if you're going to sign your game to a publisher. So, as you can see, collaboration underpins so many different parts of the game design process. Whether you're collaborating with other designers to co-design a game, collaborating with your playtesters to get feedback and better ideas about how to improve your game, or collaborating with a publisher to align your visions together for their target market and release a great product. If I'm going to leave you with one thought to think about through all of this process of collaboration, is this idea of not holding on too tightly to what you've created. I think the thing I see most often with newer designers is this inability or unwillingness to cede control over what they've made, especially if it's their very first game. And believe me, I completely get it. You've poured a lot of your time, energy, and thinking into this thing, and you feel like it's almost an extension of yourself. This is what you've put out into the world as your game design. I get it. But if you hold too tightly to your game, it's going to hold you back in so many different ways. It'll hold you back from hearing good feedback from your playtesters. It'll hold you back from possibly considering other people to work on the game together. That might speed up the process and make it an even better game. And it'll hold you back from potentially finding publishers who are willing to work with you on the game. And even if you find a publisher, it might hold you back from hearing new ideas from the publisher about new directions in which to take your creation, which might be the best thing for the audience that they're targeting. And so I think something I learned very early on, and I keep thinking about as I design games now, is that you will invest a lot of yourself into your game designs, but you can't hold too tightly. You need to be connected, but at the same time open to other people challenging and suggested changes to your game. So what have your experiences been like trying to collaborate as a game designer? Do let me know in the comments below what it's been like for you, things you've learned or things that have been challenging, and if you have any questions, I'll do my best to respond. And until next time, I wish you all the best with your game designing. Bye!